Welcome to this Sandaire Webinar on resilience with our fellow Wigmore Association members from the US and Canada, Pitcairn and Northwood. There are 60 attendees on the line, mostly from EU and North America, and we're looking forward to an interesting conversation over the next hour. Our panel today is comprised of 3 CEOs from the Wigmore Association. James Fleming, the CEO of Sandaire, Tom McCullough, the Chairman and CEO of Northwood, and Leslie Voth, the Chairwoman and Chief Executive of Pitcairn. Today's webinar is on resilience, the adaptability of a person or organisation and their ability to recover from challenges. Today we're going to tackle resilience in 4 sections: anticipating challenges, responding to uncontrollable factors and adapting to new environments, and lastly, learning. I've asked our CEOs to consider their answers from the perspective of their own firms, their family clients, and the family organisations which they run and serve. A couple of practical points before we kick off. Your audio and video are all on mute, but there will be audience participation. Firstly, through a Q&A, and you'll find at the bottom of your screens a section that says Q&A. If you click on that and submit questions, we can address those at the end. Secondly, through polls. As we go through the different sections I mentioned, we're going to have voting polls for the audience, and please take part in those and share your views. Finally, before I hand over to the panel, I thought it's worth reflecting on why we're hosting this webinar and what we're hoping for you to get out of it. The purpose of the Wigmore Association is to work together to help our families thrive. We hope that independent global intelligence, such as meetings like this, with access to trusted international networks, help our families to navigate what is an evolving world, considerably evolving at this moment in time. With that in mind, I want to kick off with the first subject for the panel on anticipating challenges. And perhaps I could put these questions to you, James, as the home team to go first, before handing over to Tom and Leslie afterwards. I wondered if you could talk to us about how you prepare your organisation and those organisations you serve for challenges, how important the Wigmore Association is in that, and whether you feel your communication with fellow members has increased, decreased, or changed over this period.
Well, thanks very much, Sam, and good afternoon, everyone. I guess like most businesses, we have a business continuity plan. And so in that sense, by definition, we plan for as many eventualities as we can imagine in that process, and the type of activities we'll need to undertake to transition our business should the need arise. And so in this particular case of the COVID virus, we have launched our business continuity plan several weeks ago now, what seems like months ago now, in fact, having been locked down for so many weeks on end. And that meant that we put our business into a working from home environment. So all of our colleagues were asked to work from home. We obviously have made use of the amazing technology that is around today. So a whole series of video conferences, and also the use of the emails and audios to bind our business together, I guess, in that sense. So we have transitioned pretty well into this environment. I think from our clients' perspective, as I'm sure my colleagues will be aware and support in this answer, you know, we plan for them as well. So when we're looking, for example, at an investment plan for a family over a lengthy period, maybe 10, 20, 30 years ahead, we try to take into account all sorts of scenario planning and prepare their thinking for what might happen in such a situation where we see a lot of volatility in investment markets. So we will propose scenarios, we will back test their investment portfolios against those scenarios, and in so doing, we can show them the effect of a perhaps dramatic fall in the market, what effect it might have on the valuation, and how they might react in the circumstances. And so we can build that into the whole process of planning for the family and planning their resilience, if you like, in recovering from disasters or issues that we've had to encounter, such as these over the last few weeks. So far as Wigmore is concerned, we're having a lot more contact and communication. We introduced a weekly CEO briefing or get together several weeks ago, and I found that particularly beneficial to talk to my colleagues, to see how they're adapting in this environment, to learn what's going on firsthand in their countries, which has been really interesting on a weekly basis. And I just found it really, really helpful to have that communication and also that connectivity at a time like this that we've been through.
Thank you for that, James. That's been very interesting. And Tom, could we hand over to you to hear some of your thoughts on how you prepare your organisation and your families for challenges like these?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's been, I'm happy to participate, and I've really enjoyed the process of thinking a bit about resilience. It's a very interesting word, and it's important to all of us. I certainly agree with James on the benefits of the Wigmore Association, not just our weekly meetings, but just really the many years we've had, almost 10 years, of getting together on a regular basis and building trust and building some of the helping build some of the preparedness that we're talking about now, business continuity planning and client communication tools and technology. So that's been very helpful. Maybe I'll give a few examples of preparedness from our side of the ocean that might be helpful. It's funny, it always reminds me of the great proverb, in calm seas, every ship has a good captain. So it's easy to be a captain of a ship when things are easy. You know, what do good captains do? They make sure there's life jackets on the boat. They make sure there's a full gas tank, an experienced crew, safety procedures, repairs are all done. Because when things, you know, when seas are choppy, that is not the time to be thinking, oh, do we have life jackets? So it's very similar in the world that we operate in for families, in our own practices, our own businesses, but also for families. Even to the extent of thinking ahead of time what your principles are. You know, when push comes to shove, what do you believe in? Integrity, quality, communication, commitment to family and community, following the plan, living debt-free, whatever those things are as a family or as a firm, if you have thought about those ahead of time, when the difficult times come, then you're much better prepared. I'll just give you one example in our firm, and one of the beauties of Wigmore is that each of us does things slightly differently, which allows us to learn from each other. I'll talk a little bit about how we at Northwood think about preparation, and one of the examples is client goals. So we create a family balance sheet for each of our clients, you know, assets on one side and liabilities on the other. But what really are liabilities for wealthy families? In most cases, really, there's only two things you can do with money. You can spend it or give it away. So there are lifetime liabilities and legacy liabilities. So what happens when things fall apart? You know, your lifetime liabilities probably are invested in something conservative and are fine, and your legacy liabilities for somebody else way down the road are invested in risk assets. So I find it's extremely helpful for people, even on a behavioral basis, to realize that the assets that dropped are probably the ones that are for somebody else in 20 or 30 or 40 years. The ones that didn't drop are the ones that you're going to need in the next 2 or 3 or 5 years that were invested in cash and fixed income. So that's just one example of ways to think about preparedness in an environment like this.
Thank you. I wonder if I could put the same question to you, Leslie.
Absolutely. We got, I'll never forget this. We got a call from the Secretary of Banking in Pennsylvania on March 11th, saying that the governor had declared Pitcairn to be a non-essential business. And for those of us who put our blood, sweat, and tears into this every day, we're like, what? And we think our business is essential. We help families thrive, but they wanted to know what our plans were and were you able to work from home? What's your business, can you engage in your business continuity plan? And of course, the answer was yes. We quickly did a test on Friday the 13th, and it went really well. So we've been to now 10 weeks working from home, 100% from home. So the first 2 weeks were very much crises communication, full on, you know, thinking about a real crisis and all hands on deck, kind of getting the employees set up, because our business is what we can run from home with the benefit of technology. You know, those of us, actually, it's pretty interesting because those of us who planned Y2K are old enough to know the pandemic planning we did in 2003. We couldn't even imagine the technology that we're using today. It was just hard for us to fathom not going into a physical office building, and what would we do if we couldn't do that and travel? And now here we are living that every single day. So it's actually gone well. That part of it's gone well. We started these CEO calls in April, and I was really glad to participate in them because unlike the other types of financial crises that we've had over the years in different countries, Wigmore's been able to give a great perspective on that. This is really a global health and social crisis. And so we're all in this together, and we're all connected in a very different way. So it's great each week to have a community just to be able to hear and talk about what they're going through. CEOs going through the same thing. I was always laughing when Eduardo would say, Leslie, we're too old. They don't want us back. The young partners voted that we would come back last. I'm like, oh boy, that means we're going to be in here for a long term. But and Tom's attitude of just let's keep moving forward. Let's keep putting one foot in front of the other. And I think for me, there's a communal trust. There's a foundation of relationships and real-time learning that we can share. Our families want to know what other families are doing. And so it's just a great way to be able to also relay another sense of how our family is doing.
Thank you. And in terms of sort of general preparation, do you find that for the families as a whole that you serve, you spend a lot of time thinking about, obviously not this kind of event, it's not that high on the risk register, but general preparing?
Yes, absolutely. We really try to help families. Well, in addition to the financial stress test, we just really try to help them think about seeing around corners that they can't yet see around. So what tools, techniques can we bring to them, and thinking can we bring to them to help them navigate generational transitions and crises just like this. You know, when you're working for families that are 100-year families, they've lived through things like this. They have the ability to navigate through that. And I always was impressed with the Pitcairn Family Office for the ability to think long term. And that gives you more confidence then to be able to share some of those things with the newer families that we serve.
Thank you, Leslie. I'm going to move the panel on to our second question, our second topic. But before I do, I'll be grateful if the audience could consider the poll question, which you're going to raise up on the screen, and give your thoughts to what you think resilience really means to you. If you could click on the box to vote, we can then start to see some answers, some indications to what the general feeling is on this one. And it's interesting to see that I can see some of these responses coming in now, that as a general trend, the responses which are much more reactionary or limited to adaptability seem to be the popular answers, which is a sort of roughly, I think, what we'd all respect. And I get to move on to our second topic here to talk through, which is all to do with responding to the uncontrollable factors that we're facing at the moment. And if I could put this question firstly to Leslie to think about. We're all familiar with the very sad headline challenges of the coronavirus. But today I'd like you to think specifically about your organization and those you serve, and ask you to highlight some of the very unique or specific challenges that you guys and your families or the business organizations that are behind them have faced, and how you've dealt with them.
Well, as I said, it was the first 2 weeks was full crisis management. And the way that I think about this is that we're all delivering a client experience at the top of the pyramid. Our clients expect the greatest service from us, and they get that. And in order for us to deliver on that, we really have to have engaged employees. So our employees needed to be safe. They needed to be hooked up and working from home. They needed to be supported in the most positive way. We really stepped up our communication efforts. We started a Monday morning huddle on March 16th. And I really used the theme of we're all in this together, and we're going to get through this together, but that this is not an individualist sport. We're going to work as a team here to get through this crisis. At that moment, we were thinking 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, we'll be getting back to work. But the crisis was really getting employees set up, then getting the communication established really well with our clients proactively. We've increased that level of communication with the clients. We then had a board meeting at the end of March. So like the first 2 weeks, the end of that week, we had a board meeting. And that for me was sort of a bookend of the first 2 weeks of we got through this and we're going to be okay. It shifts some of our thinking about our short-term plans, but long-term plans remain intact. One of our board members was quarantined in London, so he basically was supporting the idea that this is going to be a long haul. And we began to think about adjusting our plans and adjusting the mindset going into April. April here was really cold and rainy. I think it was colder and rainier than in London. And like a true Londoner, I needed some warm socks and sweaters to get through that month. And the garden was beautiful, but it was really cold. So, but we were noticing in our families that family dynamics were in full display. And that there just was a lot going on. And so we challenged ourselves to bring some new communication to the clients, knowing that we were going to be in this for a while. So we launched a new communication, multimedia communication effort called Forward Momentum. And the idea was to bring non-investment commentary, but bring lots of family ideas, lots of philanthropic ideas, how to communicate in a COVID situation, bring the new tools, techniques, experts to our clients. And it was very well received. And then we did a survey. We did a working from home survey of our team at the end of April and heard that fatigue was setting in. We could see it on the faces. We could hear it in their voices. It was really adrenaline that we've been running on for like 8 weeks straight. So come the beginning of May, we were all kind of starting to have our moments of hitting the wall and thinking, you know, how do we get through this? How do we help each other get through this? And we decided to start taking some days off. We needed to take some days off. We needed to restore and to be able to know as a leader when you have to do that and what you have to do to restore your energy for the team is just really, really important. And then we were meeting a new client. We had a client who called us actually ahead of the crises, and we were working with them. We thought for sure it would slow down. It was a family that contacted us. And we ended up being able to do prospect meetings via Zoom, and were selected and honored to be selected to be their family office. So very good news last week, which, you know, just when you're fatigued, you need that light kind of at the end of the tunnel to say, we'll get through this. But 10 weeks is a long time. So.
I know, I can speak to that too. Could I pass it over to you, Tom, maybe to reflect on some of the unique challenges you've had in Canada, and between yourselves, your organization, the families you work for and their organizations?
Well, I was thinking about this question responding to uncontrollable factors, and I was thinking about how much all of us try to bring control into our lives. We want things controlled, maybe particularly with the families that we work with. And something like this, you can't control. You know, it's out of our control. And so that's a big adjustment for people. You know, with something new and dangerous and seemingly out of control, it's normal to be afraid. And one of the things I'm, afraid of family health issues or job losses or business losses or global instability or portfolios. But one of the things I'm struck with is just how quickly everything has moved. And I was thinking about, you know, if we think in each of our own situations, you know, was there a time that we were afraid? It would be different times for all of us, and things have moved so quickly. I read a great article, Harvard Business Review article about maybe, ages ago, a month ago. And it was called that discomfort you're feeling is grief. And they use the example of the coronavirus and those 5 stages of grief that most of us know about, you know, denial, oh, well, this virus won't affect us, or anger, you're making me stay home. And then there's bargaining. Well, if I social distance for 2 weeks, everything will be all right, right? And then there's sadness. You know, I don't know when this is going to end. And then finally, there's acceptance. This is happening. I have to figure out how to proceed. I can wash my hands. I can keep a safe distance. I can learn how to work virtually. So I think there's a human element to all of this that people are facing. And as Leslie said, it's not just a financial crisis, but it's also a health and social crisis. And I think I think that's really, people are, you know, maybe coming to grips with that a little bit. But certainly, you know, some of the challenges that we've faced are the same as everybody else. We've had to find new ways to talk to each other. And as Leslie says, you know, thank goodness for Zoom and Skype and WhatsApp and all these tools. I don't know how we would have managed otherwise. And, you know, rapid changes, so we stay in touch on a regular basis. Rumor and misinformation, there's all sorts of that. Everybody's got an opinion on something. So we focus on the facts. and bring to people this is what is actually true. Don't get caught up in things that are not true. People, thinking we should change the plan. Well, I always like to say, use the example of drunk and sober. We were sober when we wrote the plan, and now we're drunk with fear or greed or busyness or whatever it is. And let's go back to see what we wrote when we were sober, because that probably is the realest example. And then also just the idea of thinking that this is the end. Oh dear, it's the end. It's probably not the end. Humanity has gotten through a lot of things. We will get through this, and sometimes people just need to be reminded of it. But it's difficult when there's uncontrollable factors, and we have to bring some level of sense of control, and that we're kind of okay in this process, and we will do it together.
James, if I could lastly hand over the same question to you to think about some of the specific challenges that our clients have faced and how they've responded to those. Interesting to hear your thoughts.
Yes, I think very similar to my two colleagues there. Just from our business perspective, first of all, I think we very well, and we established what I kind of called a rhythm of the business very quickly. And by that I mean a sequence of meetings through the course of the day for each respective team, and then cross-team meetings. And then in the initial 4 or 5 weeks, we had weekly town hall meetings, Sam, as you'll recall. And it was important to get that glue in place between us, because in the situation where, let's be honest, none of us, it wasn't a rehearsal. We haven't had a rehearsal for this before. We didn't expect this. We didn't see it coming almost. And so we had to adapt very, very quickly. And therefore, to adapt quickly, we had to force some things. So weekly meetings for the whole company, as I said, and the frequency was increased to get that glue in place between us. From our clients' point of view, I think one angle that we could look at perhaps is through their philanthropic lens. And in that sense, it's been quite interesting to work with our clients to help them to step up their philanthropic activities. I'm thinking here of one family that has a grant giving process to many worthy causes, and normally they would meet on a quarterly basis to distribute or to receive proposals and distribute funds. They've had to adapt and step up to a monthly grant giving process because the needs of their charities have been heightened, and the demand for funds has increased, and so they've had to change and adapt in that way too. And we have another family who have a wonderful cause in supporting and trying to alleviate sanitation and water problems in certain developing areas of the world. And so they have pretty good networks set up already in place in some of these countries. And they received a message that that particular country could really welcome some bars of soap. Because they had their network in place, they were able to get bars of soap delivered in double quick time. And so it's been impressive to listen to those and many of our client stories in these difficult times of how they have adapted. They have moved quickly to adapt. And it's been really quite impressive to hear those sorts of things.
And on the family business side, have there been any experiences there that you can share with us, any changes?
Do you mean the family as in our family?
As in the family businesses, the business of the families that we represent?
Yeah, I think similar, just stories of how families have adapted in difficult situations where, as I say, there's no rehearsal for it. So nothing particularly comes to mind, I suppose, but lots of impressive general stories that would support everything my colleagues have been saying. Okay.
Well, thank you for that. I thought we'd probably move on to our third point in a minute and looking more generally at the subject of adaptability. But before that, we've got another poll question coming through, which will be raised up onto your screen. I'll give you a little bit longer to focus on answering this one so that we can see some more answers. But if you could think about how long you think it would take for businesses to return to pre-COVID levels of turnover and profit and place your answers, it would be interesting to see what the audience's general views are. Before we move on, I'll give you a little longer on that one to come through in a second. We can get the hang of voting. Brilliant. Yes, I think that is. Yeah, those are all starting to come through now. And there we have it. Okay, so it's not going to be this year. It looks like it's very much a next year plan, according to our audience for coming back. Seems quite conclusive. So it's interesting to see that. Interesting to see that result. It looks like businesses are also going to be adapting. So with that general theme, we've talked about planning. We've talked about initial responding. Moving on to the general topic of adapting, perhaps I could ask you, Tom, to think and talk about this. You'll be familiar with Darwin's quote that it's not the strongest of the species that survives, but the most adaptable to change. And with that in mind, I'd be interested in how you personally are adapting and what your organizations are doing and those you serve are doing to adapt to this.
Sure, I'll answer that question, Sam. I just thought I'd pick up on James' comment about a client, one of your foundation clients. We have a couple of foundation clients as well, and one of them is focused on children and the disadvantaged in Canada. And it's what they realized is that the personal protective equipment was not coming quickly enough. It's, you know, the government was going to provide it, but it was just slow in the bureaucracy. So they partnered with a clothing manufacturer that had connections all around the world to get this equipment into for people who worked in homeless shelters and in-demand hospitals. And it was, so we were able to support, we Northwood were able to support our client in this, and they did a whole matching fund program and so on. So quite frankly, I mean, we're human beings. We feel like we'd like to do something. We can't do much, but that's, you know, every little bit helps. So that was one little example that was encouraging for our clients and our staff and that particular client, and of course all the recipients of the PPE as well. Lots of adapting. You know, you asked about personal. We ended up coming up to our lakefront cottage about 10 weeks ago for the weekend. We threw a few things in a bag, thinking, well, we'll come up here and sort of see what happens. And then we were really told to shelter in place, so we stayed here. And so it's been a lovely place to be. We've been very happy. I'm a big silver lining guy. I always think there's some good things that come out of bad things. So, you know, we've had the luxury of being able to, you know, take a walk in the forest every day. Certainly not everybody has that. And we've seen moose and beaver and deer firsthand. And so, you know, it's been, I mean, I really feel very fortunate in that case. But of course, I've been on the phone and Zoom all day with clients and with staff. It's very interesting how people are adapting. You know, Zoom. We had people in our office who were kind of negative on Zoom calls and that kind of thing. We should be talking in person. Well, when you can't talk in person, it's often better. And we've found actually some clients actually prefer the Zoom calls over having to come into the city for a meeting. So I think people will adapt, things will change, and it takes sometimes some kind of jarring effect to actually make you change. You know, thank goodness for DocuSign. I don't know if you all have DocuSign, but basically, you know, virtual signing software. It's fantastic. And, you know, just the ability for the Wigmore CEOs to talk on a regular basis via video chat and compare what's happening, even what our various governments are doing, and people asking, you know, people who are kind of further behind the curve in their country, how did your country handle this? How did you handle that? Even one of the issues right now we're all talking about is vacation. How do people take vacation? Staff take vacation. How does that work? So it's great to have somebody else to talk to. And staying on top of staff too. You know, I picked up on Leslie's comment about people seeming exhausted and just getting quiet. And so, you know, we're all in this together. We need to make sure we're encouraging each other. And we meet every second week and, you know, play a game together, have drink, you know, virtual drinks. Well, I guess they're not virtual drinks, they're real drinks, but we're just not sharing them in person. So even that is just really helpful. And from a client standpoint, we actually brought on a couple of new clients virtually as well. Like, who would ever have thought that would have happened? And we've hired 2 staff virtually. So you do adapt, you know, it's true. It's, you think you can't, but you do. And so I think that's, you know, the encouraging part of the human spirit, that we are adaptable. And that's, you know, that back to your Darwin example, it's the adaptable ones that do well. So it's encouraging in some ways.
Leslie, could I ask you the same question? How are you adapting in the US and your organizations?
Really well. Piggybacking on Tom's comments, I mean, things have gone well. After the first 2 weeks when I had to cook all the food I bought, you know, we all bought too much food and then we were cooking 3 meals a day. I was cooking 3 meals a day. I smoked a salmon and I'm like, there's just 2 of us here because it's just my husband, myself, and 3 Cavalier King Charles Spaniels. Who's going to eat all this food? So now we eat I cook 1 meal a day. So I'm thankfully not as stressed cooking. I'm enjoying the cooking. I'm enjoying being outside. Have a farm, a small farm that we live in. So I've moved the office to the barn. So I have really enjoyed being out here and just getting out for nature walks and things like that. I've really tried with my leadership to be very intentional about listening more and asking questions, and to sit back on Zoom and sort of interesting because you can do that. And if you're a family member, you could have some really powerful conversations with your family and just ask great questions and listen. Just stop and listen. And that's so powerful of sharing. People want to share. They create a spirit of openness and people wanting to share. And so I've really tried to do that. I personally do Tuesday night Zoom calls with my family at 8 o'clock at night. That's been wonderful. We did a virtual Easter versus virtual Mother's Day, but at the firm, we've encouraged people to also do some of that themselves. So I think people have absolutely adapted to working from home. There's no doubt about that. I almost think the speed of decision-making is faster. We're more empowered to kind of have those conversations, and that's a very positive thing.
Okay. And James, lastly, if I could, in the last couple of minutes on this subject, ask you, how have you been adapting?
I guess for me, Sam, I felt it was important from day one to ensure I had structure and order to my day, particularly as I wasn't used to working from home. I'm obviously used to coming to the office every day. So I decided to use my commute time in the morning to take my daily exercise, and that's become a regular pattern for me now, that every day I get up and I go for an hour and a half or 2 hour walk. It helps me clear my mind, it helps bring clarity and focus to the day ahead. And it also gets that monkey off my back that I need to take daily exercise. So I feel a certain calmness after that because I've done the exercise, it's in the book, it's ticked, and I can then concentrate on the business of the day. And that's worked well for me, and it's also helped my fitness as well. And like Leslie has been saying, I've tried to avoid too many of those meals and get the diet balance as well. So all in all, I think I've adapted quite well. But I would hasten to add, I'd still look forward to getting back to the more collegiate environment of the office at some point. But on that very point, I think we probably, as nations and certainly as businesses, have catapulted ourselves 2 or 3 generations ahead, because we've been aware of working from home. We know that businesses have flexible working within their policies. But I think we've all had to prove to ourselves that working from home can work for an entire business. And that brings whole new thinking into play in terms of future requirements for office space, how we will incorporate flexible working to a greater extent within our business practice going forward. And I think in the sense of being forced to do that, I think we've all found it's not so bad, and we can adapt in that way. So far as our clients are concerned, I think one of the features I've found of previous crises is to ensure you step up your communication at difficult times. And so we've been able to use the various tools of social media, whether it's been putting podcasts out, whether it's been putting broadcasts out on LinkedIn or whatever medium, or content for our website or articles, or working with our colleagues and producing some joint content for the Wigmore Association website. We've stepped up in many different ways to increase our communication and again, to make the glue between us and our clients a lot stronger. I think it's also impressive when I look at how our clients have adapted, and I know one of our clients who runs a consumer goods business has adapted their machinery, if I call it that for this conversation, to producing personal items of protection for our key workers in the country. And that's been great to see that happen. And how they have adapted their business to suit that, and are producing great quantities of this equipment now. So all round, it's been adapting has been the message and the key word.
Well, thank you for that. That's been very interesting, and some very good examples there. It sounds like the work environment is changing considerably, and there's obviously the question whether this is the new norm. Before we move on to the final point for discussion, I'd be grateful if the audience could again consider the question we're going to put up onto the poll board regarding home working. Do you expect your business to permanently adopt more home working in the future? Yes, no, different degrees of yes. Be interesting to see how those answers come through. I think I'd certainly say it's been interesting to see how, from my perspective, how some of the large organisations around the world have responded to this. You look at Twitter, who announced only a couple of days ago that all of their employees can stay working from home permanently, which is pretty dramatic. I think if you're a central city landlord, you're probably sitting slightly uneasy at this moment in time. Okay, can we start to see any answers coming through in a second, hopefully? Hold on. If they can come up, hopefully. I haven't got those just yet, maybe a little bit longer and they will appear. Hold on one second. Well, I will have to move. I will come back to how those answers have come through because they haven't appeared on my screen, but I am sure there'll probably be a resounding vote to more working from home is my guess.
You can see them, Sam.
Oh, can you see them? Perhaps for some reason
it's like 70%, significantly more working from home.
Well, there we are. So we better swap those work suits for track suits. Onto our last question. Our last subject I want you to think about before we move to some of the Q&As we've had submitted. With every crisis, there's one or two important lessons we learn, whether it's a financial crisis or this crisis. And I'd be interested to know what you feel you and the organisations you serve have learned from this period. And perhaps I could hand back to you, James, as sort of home team to answer this last of the topics first.
Yes, I think I'd probably summarise what I've said in the previous question, Sam. I think the importance of being adaptable and flexible, we've talked at length about that today, but I think that has really proved to be a winner in this particular crisis, where we had no forward planning, we had no rehearsal for this, and we had no real precedent, certainly in our lifetime, in the Western world, you might say, to how to cope and react in that. And certainly with our government, sometimes it seems like they're making policy on the hoof. I think we have been less of that in the sense of our policies have stood well, but we've nevertheless had to be flexible and to adapt, as we've all said today. Foresight and planning, I think, is another lesson for me that rings very strong in this particular time. And for our families, having things such as family Bibles in place and constitutional documents in place to ensure that they're catering for whatever might be thrown at them at any particular time. And I think that's been a lesson to perhaps revisit some of that as we go forward and ensure people do have proper documents in place and proper Bibles and governance around that in place for them. And then I guess for me, communication is always something that I feel is a very important feature of any relationship, whether it's at home or whether it's with your clients or whether it's with your colleagues. And the less you communicate, the more likely you are to break up a relationship. And therefore, conversely, the more you communicate and the more active you are in your communication, the stronger the glue between everybody concerned and the stronger the relationship. And I think that's been proven true once again in this particular situation. So those are the three strong lessons for me going forward, Sam.
Thank you. And Tom, could I pass the same thought and topic over to you?
Well, speaking of working from home and sweatpants, one example is that Walmart is selling about double the amount of tops as they are bottoms. Well, it tells us something. In the vein of never waste a good crisis, I think one of the things I'm learning is, what good things can come out of this. And just think about our own character of ourselves and our family and friends and staff and so on. Most of those character traits have been forged in difficult times. They're not forged in good times, they're forged in difficult times. So I think there's something significant about thinking about what are the character traits that we are developing as we speak. Adaptability certainly is one of them. Hope, creativity, many things. I certainly agree with James about issues of planning ahead, and I was thinking, that is one of the roles of a family office. That is one of the roles that we play in the lives of our clients. We think ahead on their behalf. You can't cover everything. Nobody knew exactly that this virus was going to happen when it did, but we knew something like this was going to happen at some point. So we plan and we test, we stress test, we record, and so we're hoping that families are seeing the benefits of all that work ahead of time that we've done. And another thought I had was just to remember that life is a movie, not a snapshot. So whatever situation we're in, whether we're at the top of the mountain or the bottom of the mountain, that is not all of life. All of life is a movie, and it continues on. And we human beings tend to think that, life is going to be a continuation of what we see right now. We thought it was going to be all great on February 25th. Markets were good and the economy was good. But no, that's not normal life. And now we think it's difficult, and how will it ever reopen? And well, that's not it either. Life is a movie and it evolves. And I think that's really important to remember. And maybe my final comment is just while there have been negative stories out there, there's also been lots of positive stories about the best of humankind. We know the example of our healthcare workers and people who are in sort of unsung roles in the world who are doing their bit, and people helping neighbors. And I don't know, I'm just very encouraged by that. It's wonderful to see that in our families and our clients, our staff, and ourselves. And for me, I hope we could retain some of that. I know it's hard when things get back to normal, but just the idea of a little bit of grace and generosity and giving to each other, it'd be wonderful if we can retain that. And we've talked about that as a Wigmore group too, just how do we encourage that in our own firms and our own clients and our own families.
And Leslie, lastly, if I could pass over to you for some thoughts from the US.
Definitely. I think there's a wonderful role for us to play to help families modernize their family office and think virtual, and support that effort to be a more virtual family office. Working in a 100-year-old family office has brought with it some really interesting concepts. And Dennis Jaffe wrote a book on 100-year families that was published last year. And it's really about the adaptability, the ability to be resilient, reinvent, and mostly to stay positive, the positive mindset. And I am reminded over and over that the glass half full mindset, it gets me out of my worst days. The gratefulness that our families have of the ability to support the needs of the communities that they live in, or the needs of the employees that work for their family businesses. These are wonderful families that we're privileged to serve. And I just am grateful to be able to support them and really think about gratitude, and gratitude that gets us through the darker times.
Wonderful, thank you. I thought we'd move on lastly to some questions and answers, a Q&A session. We've had a series of questions submitted, and perhaps I could just sort of allocate them to each of you. The first one I thought I might direct towards you, Tom, if you're okay with that. It's a question that's coming very specifically to family offices and asked whether family offices are more adaptable in a crisis than other businesses. Tom, are we more malleable than others?
Well, in some levels, the answer is obviously yes. A nail salon is hard to do virtually. A restaurant and a hospital, tricky virtually. A manufacturing shop is trickier virtually. So we're definitely a business or an operation that can quite easily move to virtual operation. I mean, we don't want that. We're humans and we love the interaction with our families and our colleagues. Hopefully it's not as long as all that in the survey that we get back together again. But I think we are uniquely positioned, and especially we've talked about this with the technology tools at our disposal now. It just makes it much easier. And so yeah, I think the family offices are extremely fortunate. And I think we've all showed that we can adapt and do it quite well. And in fact, some clients are preferring it. So that's great.
The second question that we've had is, I'm going to direct this one to you, James, and then I think the third one I might share out. If you had a crystal ball, what do you think the working environment may look like in a year's time? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, James. Can I keep my flip-flops on?
Well, I'm going to ask you to stand up in a minute, Sam.
Not just clothes.
On second thoughts, Dave. Well, look, I think I touched on this earlier. I do think we're going to see a change in the working environment, and you know, society loves to bring new phrases in, and we've got this great one that's circulating at the moment, which is the new normal. Thankfully, I haven't heard the one that's generally dusted off and used at these sorts of times, which is that we're in a new paradigm, because that's the time always to lock the front door and hope it goes away, because it's generally a disaster when somebody says that. But certainly new normal, I think, does describe how an office environment of the near future might look like. And I said, you know, that this working from home has made a lot of us think, do we need a floor plate of this size? Do we need to put so much of our hard-earned income into rental, or could we reinvest it back into our business in a better way and be therefore more flexible in our approach with our staff and our working policies? So I think that conversation has just become a lot closer to us. And I think all of us on this panel will certainly be looking at that very closely. As to what it specifically will look like, I think more technology. We've all been amazed at the video technology. Clearly, that's only going to get stronger because technology does. You know, whether we'll have homes full of computer screens looking like Bloomberg, terminals everywhere, etc. I doubt we'll have that. I'm certainly not going to give over a whole room of my house and have 6 screens coming in from around the world. But I think, you know, something more modest with a couple of screens and better service would be very appropriate looking forward. So I think we're going to see some change, yes, and it'll be interesting plotting and planning how that will look. Okay.
And the last question I want to put to you, and I'm going to put this to all of you, but perhaps Leslie, I can pick on you first. It's a political question, but we've been asked how you'd rate your respective member countries' response to the COVID-19 crisis. So any thoughts would be gratefully received. And Leslie, maybe I can ask you to tackle that first.
I think it's really challenging. I would never want to be in their shoes, which is one of the real challenging things these days. Is the politics of it all, really challenging. This country was never built around the federal government telling people what to do. It's the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and so you can feel the real groundswell and two parts, a very divided country. Those that feel that we should have never shut, and those that feel that we absolutely need to stay very cautious until there's a vaccine. So it's very polarized. The politicians on each side of the argument are weighing in on it. The governors have done a reasonably good job. So the governor is the one that regulates our state, and they are also taking they're taking some hits. But you know, Governor Cuomo, we've got our governor, the governor of New Jersey. They've got Tom Wolf and others trying to collaborate, trying to really do what's best here. And I think in the worst of times, that's where we've seen the best leadership coming from, although it's imperfect. And at the federal level, I think they've been catching up. They certainly, you know, we are a country that aren't used to hearing about the supply chain problems that we've had around things. I went to buy a grill over the weekend and I couldn't get a grill for 90 days because of supply chain problems. So in a small town appliance store, I wanted to give them my business and couldn't do it. So it's really, you can feel the groundswell. People are ready to get back, and it's really controversial. I'm not going to weigh in on the political rating.
Tom, if I could pass the same to you, how do you feel Canada's performed?
Well, it's interesting. Just you know, for a small country like Canada, 35 million people sitting right beside the U.S., we often compare ourselves to the U.S. And Leslie mentioned, you know, the founding words for America were life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In Canada, those 3 words were peace, order, and good government. So there's your political science lesson for the day. There's part of the mindset of 2 different countries. So I would say that I have been impressed with the way the government at various levels have handled things, and I would say most Canadians are, the popularity ratings, if you like, for most of our politicians have gone up dramatically. There's been, I'd say, cooperation between levels of government. I think they took it seriously from day one. They enforced stay at home, they enforced social distancing, provided support. You know, now, I mean, I think the real question is, the other shoe to drop is, you know, we've spent or committed massive amounts of money to the support of people in these situations, and how is that going to work out in the end? I think a lot of people have those concerns, but I would say that you know, I don't know, Canadians, you know, it's cold here. We kind of adapt, and there's a joke that says, how do you get 50 Canadians out of a swimming pool? The answer is everybody out of the pool. So you know, Canadians are pretty good at hunkering down and doing what it is that they need to do, and I think this example, has been no different. I'd say very cooperative and collegial.
And James, you touched on it earlier, but perhaps you could expand on your views on how we've performed in the United Kingdom.
Look, I think the danger or the trap you could fall into with that question is to try and look at it through the lens of hindsight. And as we know, hindsight always sees everything very perfectly and measures against the perfect template. And of course, it's not a perfect situation at all. As I said earlier, you know, governments everywhere are making policy on the run, reacting to statistics, reacting to science. But the science is evolving almost by the day, it seems, as we get fresh news, fresh data that is again analysed, and yet more statistics come through. I think in general, I think the United Kingdom government has reacted well. First of all, of course, we had the most unusual and almost horrific situation of our own Prime Minister contracting the virus and being very serious in his condition at one point. And it made us all stop and draw our breath and think, wow, this is incredibly serious if our own Prime Minister can get this situation and get this virus. Thankfully, he's recovered and has come back to lead the country. I think the economic response was very swift, and our Chancellor announced a whole series of measures to inject liquidity into the economy and also to provide support for people whose income has literally dropped off a cliff. Again, there will be some who will argue that's not perfect and more needs to be done. But equally, I think one can only be impressed by the breathtaking speed that was seen in the movement to get those measures out and into the country's hands. The one area I think we would all be impressed with is in the UK is our National Health Service. And we've all been moved by tremendous stories and the phrase the frontline workers and the traumas that they encounter day after day in dealing with patients in the intensive care units. And of course, the thousands of families that have been affected has been tragic to witness some of the stories that we've all heard and experienced. And again, I think we've seen it probably penetrate into our own circles of friends and influence. And so it's a very real situation. So against all of that, I think our government has reacted very well. I'm sure it could do more, and I'm sure it will do more. But in general, I'm quite pleased and very supportive of what they're doing. I think, again, I mentioned communication earlier. We have a daily briefing in the UK. A senior member of the government goes to the stand and addresses the press and also takes questions, and also on certain days of the week takes questions from members of the public. So they're putting themselves in the front line to face off to the public and account for their actions. So that has been a good process to have that level of communication from our central government.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for those summaries. The last part I just wanted to reflect on is really about the financial services industry. For a long time, we've all worked in that industry, and it's been really tied to a desk in the past. And I think many of us will be positively surprised, especially through the way you've all talked over the last hour, about how resilient and malleable we've been in this shift to working from home. And it certainly sounds like this is forming an element of a future plan. And the question is, do you think this is the new norm? And I'm happy to hand that over to maybe Tom to start with.
Well, I think what the poll suggested, the participant poll today, is that, yes, it probably will be the new norm, that there'll be more flexibility, and you know, we will adapt to client need, and we'll, as managers of businesses, will be more flexible to staff needs, and we will try different things. And honestly, I think, you know, if you were never pushed, you'd never change. And I think, you know, that's one of the, again, the silver linings of these situations. We're pushed. I think James said we've jumped ahead several generations in technology use, and so you have to be pushed. It's the way it, you know, it's too bad it's something like this, but quite frankly, that's the way it works. Change happens. It doesn't really happen incrementally in many ways. It's got to have some kind of impact. Think back to the Great Depression and all the things that came out of that ended up, you know, being positive for the world in terms of, you know, the standard of living of people. You know, it took that seriousness to actually, of an event, to actually make change happen that had been talked about for years and decades, perhaps. So I think, you know, on a smaller scale, something like work from home will be an option in ways that it hasn't been in the past, and many other adaptations will come along with it as well.
And Leslie, your thoughts?
I agree with Tom. I think in the past, you know, we've had key employees ask for flexibility of work from home, and we've managed to make it work. But they now say the playing field's leveled now for them, because now everyone's working from home, and we get to see the positives and the negatives of it, and we'll be able to build good business strategy around it. I think no one is able to visualize yet what it's going to be like to go back into the office and we're all wearing these masks. How much fun is that really going to be? We can't even picture ourselves in the office wearing these things. So Zoom meetings, I think, are here for a while. Even if you're in the office, I can't even imagine not doing a Zoom meeting if half the firm is working remote. So we've got we rolled out a business continuity strategy for when we return to work, but we're really going to let the employee decide. You know, some are really comfortable, others are not. Some have elderly parents living with them. Others have young children that are down for the summer. So for the next good chunk of time, this is the new norm. And I think over time, we're going to do some really smart strategic planning about virtual in the future, you know, and more flexibility moving forward. I know for sure. I love James' quote that this has catapulted us forward. What was it, James? 2 generations? Don't you think? I couldn't agree more.
Well, in my technology world, it's about 10 generations for me. Sam, I guess from my point of view, I think there are two features of or principles, if you like, that have been very present and constant in my career. And the first of those is that change is constant. And I think we can look back, particularly in financial services, and see enormous change over the last 10, 20, 30 years in our industry. And I think this new event, this latest event, will continue that process. And then there's a great one that follows on from that, which is adapt or die. And we've talked about that extensively today, but just to raise it one last time, if you like, if a business doesn't adapt to the changing circumstances, then inevitably it will start to go backwards. And if it goes backwards, it's a slippery slope from there downwards. So adapting and the importance of adapting and continuing, I think, is really central to the new norm. Unlike Leslie, I'm afraid I haven't got any props to put on my
Well, thank you very much. It's been a fascinating conversation we had over the last hour. There's some really interesting examples and the insights, and I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and I'd like to thank you, Tom, Leslie, James, for very kindly sharing your thoughts with us today. It's been really helpful, and I really feel we've learned a lot. So thank you very much, and I look forward to welcoming others at future webinars.
Thank you,
Thank
Sam.
you.
Stay well.